The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine sat in her favorite chair, watching the gardens she had grown to love over the years. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter that had arrived just hours before. The diagnosis was final, and the doctors had given her only months to live. She looked around the room where she and William had shared countless quiet moments, where they had planned their children's futures, and where they had dreamed of growing old together. William found her there when he returned from his morning run, still in his tracksuit, his face glowing with the exercise he used to clear his mind before another day of royal duties. One look at Catherine's face told him everything had changed. The letter lay open on the small table beside her chair, and he could see the official hospital letterhead even from across the room. His heart sank as he realized this was the moment they had both been dreading since the first symptoms appeared months ago. Without saying a word, William crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. Catherine looked into his eyes, those same blue eyes that had captured her heart at university, and saw her own pain reflected there. They had always been able to communicate without words, a skill that had served them well during years in the public eye. But now that silence felt heavier than any words could be, she reached out and touched his face gently, tracing the lines that worry had etched around his eyes over the past few months. The children were at school, unaware that their mother had just received news that would change their lives forever. George, Charlotte, and Louis had noticed that their mother seemed tired lately, but Catherine and William had worked hard to maintain normalcy in their daily routines. Now, sitting in the quiet of their private sitting room, they both knew that normalcy was about to become a precious memory. Catherine had always been the strong one, the anchor that kept their family grounded despite the constant pressure of royal life. She had handled every crisis with grace, from media scandals to family disagreements, always putting duty and family first. But this was different. This was something that no amount of training or preparation could have readied her for. She thought about all the causes she championed, all the people she had helped, and wondered if she had done enough with the time she had been given. William stood slowly and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where his children played, where he and Catherine had stolen quiet moments away from the cameras and the crowds. He remembered their wedding day, how radiant she had looked walking down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, how the whole world had watched them promise to love each other in sickness and in health. He had never imagined that promise would be tested so soon, or so severely. The weight of what lay ahead settled over them both like a heavy blanket. There would be difficult conversations with the children, with the Queen, with the entire royal family. There would be decisions to make about Catherine's care, about how much to share with the public, about how to protect their children from the media storm that was sure to follow. But for now, in this moment, there was only the two of them and the love that had carried them through everything else life had thrown their way. The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor appointments and difficult family meetings. Catherine insisted on maintaining her public appearances as long as possible, believing that her duty to the people came first, even now. William watched her with a mixture of pride and heartbreak as she continued to smile and wave at crowds, knowing that each engagement might be one of her last. The press began to notice that she looked thinner, more fragile, but the palace maintained that she was simply tired from her busy schedule. At home, the conversations with the children were the hardest part. George, being the oldest at 10, seemed to sense that something serious was happening. He had always been perceptive, watching his parents' faces carefully during family dinners, asking questions that showed he understood more than most children his age. Charlotte, 8 years old and full of energy, continued to chatter about her friends and her riding lessons, but she had started climbing into her parents' bed more often at night, seeking comfort she couldn't quite name. Little Louis, only 5, remained blissfully unaware of the storm clouds gathering around his family. He still ran to his mother when he scraped his knee, still demanded bedtime stories in her special voice, still believed that parents were magic and could fix anything. Catherine treasured these moments with him, knowing that soon he would have to learn that even parents have limits, even mothers can't always make everything better. The palace staff began to notice changes too. Catherine's lady-in-waiting found her sitting quietly in her office one afternoon, staring at photographs of past royal tours and charitable events. The housekeeper discovered her in the children's rooms late at night, organizing their belongings and writing little notes that she tucked away in their drawers. The security team reported that she had asked to visit certain places one more time, locations that held special meaning for her and William. William threw himself into his work with an intensity that worried those closest to him. He took on extra engagements, spent longer hours at his desk, and pushed himself through each day with a determination that bordered on desperation. His private secretary noticed that he had begun asking detailed questions about the children's education, about trust funds and security arrangements, preparing for a future he couldn't bear to imagine but knew he had to plan for. The couple started taking long walks together in the evenings, when the children were asleep and the palace was quiet. They walked through the gardens where they had announced their engagement, past the greenhouse where Catherine liked to work with her hands in the soil, around the paths where they had taught their children to ride bicycles. They talked about memories, about hopes they had shared, about dreams that would now remain unfulfilled. Sometimes they walked in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, each lost in thoughts too deep for words. During one of these walks, Catherine told William about the letters she had been writing. Letters for the children's birthdays, their graduations, their wedding days. Letters for when they faced their first heartbreak, their first major decision, their first child. She had been working on them late at night, pouring all her love and wisdom onto paper, trying to give them pieces of herself that would last long after she was gone. William listened with tears in his eyes, amazed by her strength and her determination to continue mothering their children even beyond her own lifetime. As autumn arrived, bringing with it the golden colors that Catherine had always loved, her condition began to worsen more rapidly. The treatments that had initially shown promise were no longer working, and she made the difficult decision to stop the aggressive therapies that were making her so sick. She wanted to spend her remaining time feeling as much like herself as possible, creating final memories with her family rather than fighting a battle she now knew she couldn't win. The decision to step back from public duties was announced quietly, with the palace stating only that Catherine needed to focus on her health. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Flowers began arriving at the palace gates by the thousands, along with letters and cards from people around the world who had been touched by Catherine's work over the years. Children sent drawings, elderly people shared stories of meeting her at charitable events, and families wrote about how her advocacy had changed their lives. William found himself reading these letters to Catherine in the evenings, both of them moved to tears by the outpouring of love from people they had never met. A little girl from Wales had drawn a picture of Catherine in her wedding dress, writing underneath that she wanted to be a princess who helped people just like her. A man from Scotland wrote about how Catherine's mental health advocacy had helped him seek treatment for depression. A mother from Northern Ireland thanked her for highlighting the importance of early childhood development, crediting Catherine's work with helping her understand her own child's needs better. The royal family rallied around William and Catherine during this time, putting aside any past differences to support them through the crisis. The Queen, despite her own advancing age, made frequent private visits to Kensington Palace, spending quiet afternoons with Catherine and offering the wisdom that came from decades of duty and service. Prince Charles cleared his schedule to spend more time with his grandchildren, taking on some of William's responsibilities so that he could be present for his wife's final months. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, moved into a guest wing of the palace to be closer to their daughter and grandchildren. Carol, a mother herself, understood the fierce need Catherine felt to prepare her children for life without her. Together they worked on creating memory books, recording videos of Catherine reading the children's favorite stories, and organizing family photographs that would help preserve precious moments for years to come. The hardest part was watching the children slowly come to understand what was happening. George began having nightmares and struggled to concentrate on his schoolwork. Charlotte became more clingy, following Catherine around the house and asking repeatedly if she was feeling better today. Louis, still too young to fully grasp the situation, sensed the sadness around him and began acting out, throwing tantrums that were unlike his usual sunny disposition. Catherine worked with child psychologists to find age-appropriate ways to help her children process what was happening. She created special traditions for each of them, individual moments that they could treasure forever. With George, she worked on a scrapbook about their family history, helping him understand his place in the royal lineage and the responsibilities he would one day carry. With Charlotte, she planted a small garden explaining how flowers come back every spring, teaching her daughter about cycles of life and renewal. With Louis, she simply focused on being present, reading extra stories, singing more songs, and holding him closer during their daily routines. William watched his wife navigate these final months with the same grace and dignity that had defined her entire time in the public eye, and he fell in love with her all over again. Her concern was always for others, for their children's well-being, for his future happiness, for the charities that would continue her work. She approached her own death the way she had approached her life, with courage, compassion, and an unwavering focus on service to others. Winter brought an unexpected peace to Kensington Palace. Catherine's condition had stabilized temporarily, giving the family precious extra time together. She used these weeks to create final traditions and memories that would last her children a lifetime. Every morning she insisted on having breakfast with all three children, listening to their chatter about school and friends, storing up these ordinary moments that she knew William would need to remember after she was gone. The palace became a cocoon of warmth and love during those final months. Catherine had always been the heart of their home, and now she poured all her remaining energy into making it a place of comfort rather than sadness. She worked with the household staff to plan special celebrations for each child, ensuring that birthdays and holidays would still feel magical even in her absence. She recorded herself singing lullabies, knowing that William would need these recordings during the difficult nights ahead. The most touching moment came when Catherine decided to plan her own memorial service. Rather than leaving these painful decisions for William to make alone, she worked quietly with palace officials to design a service that would celebrate her life, rather than simply mourn her death. She chose readings that reflected her faith and her values, selected music that had meaning for her family, and requested that the focus be on the causes she had championed, rather than on royal protocol. She also made a decision that surprised everyone, requesting that the service be held at the small chapel where she and William had been confirmed in their faith, rather than at Westminster Abbey where they had been married. She wanted something intimate, something that reflected the woman she had been rather than just the title she had held. She explained to William that she wanted their children to remember her as their mother first, the princess second. During the long winter evenings, Catherine began having individual conversations with each of her children about the future. With George, she talked about the weight of responsibility he would one day carry, but also about the joy that could be found in service to others. She told him that being future king was not about privilege, but about dedication, and that she trusted him to use his position to help people the way she had tried to do. She gave him her personal prayer book, inscribed with notes about finding strength and faith during difficult times. With Charlotte, Catherine shared stories about the strong women in their family history. From Queen Elizabeth to her own mother, Carol, she wanted her daughter to understand that she could be anything she wanted to be, that being born into the royal family was an opportunity to make a difference in the world. Together they looked through photo albums of Catherine's charitable work, and she explained how even small acts of kindness could change someone's entire day. She gave Charlotte her favorite piece of jewelry, a simple necklace that had belonged to William's mother, Diana. With little Louis, the conversations were simpler, but no less important. Catherine focused on making him feel secure and loved, repeatedly telling him that even when she couldn't be with him physically, she would always be watching over him. She created a special box of items for him to open when he was older, including photographs, letters, and small mementos from their time together. She made him promise to always remember how much she loved him, and to be kind to others the way she had taught him. The extended royal family took turns visiting during these months, each wanting to spend time with Catherine and to support William and the children. Harry flew in from California multiple times, putting aside any personal differences to be present for his brother during this impossible time. The visits were emotional but healing, as old wounds were set aside in the face of something much more important than past disagreements. Catherine also received visitors from the various charities and organizations she had supported over the years. Representatives from mental health organizations, children's hospitals, and environmental groups came to thank her personally for her advocacy. These meetings energized her in a way that surprised her doctors, proving that her sense of purpose and service had always been the source of her strength. Even facing death, she continued to inspire others and to find ways to make a positive impact on the world around her. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the daffodils that Catherine had planted in the palace gardens during her first years as William's wife. She had always found hope in the return of flowers after winter, and now she spent hours sitting by the window, watching the garden come back to life one final time. William would often find her there in the mornings, wrapped in the soft blue blanket that had become her constant companion, her face peaceful despite the pain he knew she was feeling. The children had adapted to their new routine with the resilience that often surprises adults. They had learned to be gentler with their mother, to speak more softly when she was resting, to treasure the good days when she felt strong enough to play games or help with homework. Charlotte had become her mother's little helper, bringing her tea and arranging flowers from the garden in small vases around her room. George took on more responsibility with Louis, reading him bedtime stories when Catherine was too tired to do it herself. During one of her stronger weeks, Catherine asked William to take her on a private tour of all their special places. They visited the university where they had met, walking hand in hand through the quad where William had first noticed her at a charity fashion show. They went to the restaurant where he had proposed, sitting at the same table and remembering how nervous they had both been that night. They drove through the countryside to visit the church where they had been married, standing quietly in the abbey where they had promised to love each other forever. Each location brought back floods of memories, and Catherine wanted to revisit them all while she still could. At their first apartment, she told William about the dreams she had harbored as a young woman, about the family she had hoped they would build together. At the hospital where each of their children had been born, she spoke about the overwhelming joy she had felt holding each baby for the first time, and how grateful she was that they had been able to create such beautiful life together. The most emotional stop was at Diana's grave, where Catherine had rarely visited but felt drawn to now. She wanted to tell William's mother about the grandchildren she would never meet, about how proud she would have been of the man William had become. Standing there among the flowers that visitors still left regularly, Catherine felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that she would soon be watching over her children the way Diana watched over William. As they drove back to London that evening, Catherine and William talked about practical matters that needed to be addressed. She wanted to make sure that William understood her wishes for the children's upbringing, that he knew how important it was to maintain their connection to her family, the Middletons. She worried about how he would manage the overwhelming responsibilities of single parenthood, while also fulfilling his royal duties, and they discussed ways to ensure he wouldn't carry the burden alone. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine gave William a sealed envelope containing instructions for their future. Inside were details about birthday traditions she wanted maintained, suggestions for helping each child through difficult milestones, and reminders about the importance of keeping their mother's memory alive in positive ways. She had also included the locations where she had hidden letters for each child, to be given to them at appropriate times throughout their lives. The letter also contained Catherine's thoughts about William's future, her hope that he would eventually find love again, and her blessing for him to be happy beyond her death. She knew that he would resist the idea now, but she wanted him to know that she didn't expect him to remain alone forever. She wanted him to find someone who would love their children as their own, someone who would understand the unique pressures of royal life and help him navigate the years ahead. William read the letter through tears, amazed by his wife's selflessness even in the face of her own death. She had thought of everything, anticipated every difficulty he might face, and tried to provide solutions and comfort for problems that hadn't even arisen yet. Her final act of love was giving him permission to build a new life when the time felt right, while ensuring that her own love for their family would continue to guide them all. The final weeks arrived sooner than anyone had expected. Catherine's doctors gently informed the family that the time for active treatment had passed, and that comfort and peace should now be the primary focus. The decision was made to bring in hospice care, allowing Catherine to remain at home surrounded by the people and places she loved most. The palace transformed into a sanctuary of quiet love, with family members taking turns sitting with Catherine, sharing stories, and simply being present for these last precious moments. William rarely left her side during those final days. He had arranged for his royal duties to be covered by other family members, understanding that nothing was more important than being with his wife as she faced her last battle. They spent hours talking about their children, their marriage, and the beautiful life they had built together. Catherine's voice grew weaker, but her spirit remained strong, and she continued to offer William comfort and encouragement, even as her own strength faded. The children were allowed to spend time with their mother in a way that felt natural and unforced. They would curl up in bed with her to watch movies, show her their schoolwork, and tell her about their dreams for the future. Catherine listened to every word, storing these final conversations in her heart. She told them stories about their grandparents, both living and deceased, helping them understand their place in a family legacy that stretched back generations. On what would be her final evening, Catherine asked for one last family dinner together. Despite her weakness, she insisted on joining everyone at the dining room table that had been the center of so many happy family gatherings. The meal was simple, filled with the children's favorite foods and gentle conversation. Catherine looked around the table at her family, memorizing their faces, their laughter, the way the candlelight reflected in their eyes. After dinner, the family gathered in the sitting room where it all began, where Catherine had first received her diagnosis months earlier. Now, instead of fear and uncertainty, the room was filled with love and gratitude. The children took turns reading aloud from their favorite books, their voices mixing with the soft music playing in the background. Catherine closed her eyes and listened, surrounded by the sounds of her family's voices, feeling complete despite knowing that this chapter of their story was ending. Late that night, after the children had been tucked into bed with extra hugs and kisses, Catherine and William had their final private conversation. She thanked him for giving her the most beautiful life she could have imagined, for being not just a loving husband but also her closest friend and most trusted partner. She told him how proud she was of the father he had become, how grateful she was for every moment they had shared together, from their carefree university days to these final moments of profound love and loss. William held her hand as she spoke about her hopes for their children's futures, her dreams of the adults they would become, and her confidence that he would guide them with wisdom and love. She reminded him of all the joy they had brought into the world, all the people they had helped, all the difference their partnership had made during their time together. Even facing death, Catherine focused on gratitude rather than sadness, on the love they had shared rather than the love they would lose. As dawn broke over London, Catherine slipped peacefully away in her sleep, surrounded by the family who had been the center of her world. William stayed beside her, holding her hand, whispering words of love and promises about their children's future. The sun rose that morning on a different world, one without Catherine's bright presence, but also one that had been forever changed by the love, grace, and service she had brought to it during her too brief time as a wife, mother, and princess. The world woke up to the news that morning with collective grief and disbelief. Flags were lowered to half-mast across the Commonwealth, and tributes began pouring in from world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people whose lives Catherine had touched. Social media filled with photographs and memories shared by those who had met her during charitable events, official visits, and chance encounters. The outpouring of love and respect was unlike anything the royal family had seen in generations. But inside Kensington Palace, the focus remained on the three children who had just lost their mother. William gathered George, Charlotte, and Louis together that morning, holding them close as he gently explained that their mother had gone to be with the angels during the night. Their reactions were as different as their personalities. George, mature beyond his years, asked thoughtful questions about what would happen next. Charlotte cried heartbrokenly, but then asked if she could pick flowers from the garden to leave in her mother's room. Little Louis didn't fully understand but stayed close to his father, sensing that something important had changed. The memorial service took place a week later, following Catherine's wishes for an intimate gathering that celebrated her life, rather than simply mourning her death. The small chapel was filled with family members, close friends, and representatives from the many charitable organizations that had benefited from her advocacy. Instead of formal eulogies, people shared personal stories about Catherine's kindness, her sense of humor, and her unwavering commitment to making the world a better place for children and families. William spoke briefly about his wife, not as a princess or public figure, but as the woman who had made him a better man and a loving father. His voice broke as he described her courage during her final months, her determination to prepare their children for the future, and her selfless concern for others even as she faced her own mortality. The children sat in the front row, supported by their grandparents and Uncle Harry, understanding that they were saying goodbye to someone irreplaceable, but surrounded by love that would help them carry on. The public response continued for weeks after the service. The Diana Memorial Fund was renamed the Diana and Catherine Foundation, dedicated to continuing both women's work in mental health, children's welfare, and family support. Donations poured in from around the world, ensuring that Catherine's legacy would live on through practical help for those in need. Schools, hospitals, and community centers requested permission to name facilities in her honor, wanting to keep her memory alive through service to others. William found the first months after Catherine's death almost unbearable, but he was sustained by the structure she had put in place and the support system she had carefully arranged. The letters she had written provided comfort during the darkest moments, and the traditions she had established helped maintain normalcy for the children. Slowly, gradually, the household began to find a new rhythm, different from before, but still filled with love and purpose. The children, in the way that children do, began to heal while keeping their mother's memory alive in their daily lives. George grew more serious, but also more compassionate, understanding his future responsibilities through the lens of service that Catherine had taught him. Charlotte threw herself into the garden that she and her mother had planted together, finding peace in watching things grow and flourish. Louis, though he would have few clear memories of his mother as he grew older, was surrounded by stories and photographs that ensured he would know how deeply he had been loved. Years later, when William looked back on that final goodbye, he realized that Catherine's greatest gift had not been in how she had lived, but in how she had prepared them all for living without her. She had faced death with the same grace and strength that had defined her life, teaching their children by example that love continues even when physical presence ends. Her silent farewell had indeed moved millions to tears, but more importantly, it had shown the world what it meant to face life's greatest challenges with dignity, faith, and an unshakable commitment to those we love most. The princess was gone, but the mother, wife, and woman of service lived on in every life she had touched, every heart she had opened, and every person who had learned from her example that true nobility comes not from titles or position, but from how we choose to love and serve others during our brief time on this earth.